Just in terms of housekeeping, I would ask everybody to please mute their phones or their Teams connections. There was some feedback as we started the meeting. It sounds good right now to me. Through the course of the meeting, I think there will be opportunities to have some interaction, although most of it will come at the end of the process. You can certainly enter questions using the chat function so that speakers will be able to see those questions and may address them as they're running through their presentations. And then towards the end of the time today, we'll have a more interactive session where people can raise their hands and voice those questions directly. Next slide. I won't go through in any detail here other than to say we've got a lineup presenting some great material today. To give some context to where we are in this series of technical presentations, we focused over the course of the last year, since the cancellation of the Global Methane Forum last year, primarily on technical solutions, and certainly we saw those series of presentations references to programs that exist today that support the execution of those technical solutions. And so the focus today will be how to finance that action rather than the solution itself. Next slide, please. Who's GMI? So public-private partnership, great coverage globally, 45 different partner countries, and I think more importantly, 700 plus project network members. So organizations and individuals are interested in reducing methane emissions, and a good proportion of those focused on oil and gas sector. Next slide. Where we sit in the organization, so 3 subcommittees, oil and gas, biogas, and coal mines, driven from a steering committee. So the preponderance of the population today interested directly in oil and gas, but technical issues crossing the boundaries of those committees, and in particular, I think today sets up for that cross reference in particular. And next slide. Emphasizing the distribution of where those emissions are coming from. So again, oil and gas setting itself up as a significant contributor, and the solutions that we provide through GMI making a significant impact if we can match up this finance with the technical solutions that we provided or pointed to before. And lastly, a reminder of the Global Methane Challenge, which is still running, and several members of past presentations and today are listed in that Global Methane Challenge, so you can touch that screen online and see significant projects that are being put forward as examples of opportunities to reduce methanes. So if you're interested, please contact there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Katie Sullivan to lead the panel discussion and provide some introduction as to who's participating today and her role through AIDA. Katie, all yours.
Thank you, James. And welcome, everybody. After over a year in the making, we're delighted to finally come together, even virtually, to co-host this special event with GMI. And a special shout out to, well, James and your partnership, but also to Yunus, Sam, and the Tetra Tech team for the support and coordination efforts throughout. So I'm Katie Sullivan, Managing Director at AIDA, the International Emissions Trading Association. I have the pleasure of moderating today's session with I think, a pretty stellar group of panelists. For those of you unfamiliar with AIDA, we've been around for over 20 years now, and we are the collective global business voice for the role of markets and cooperation to tackle climate and accelerate the transition to net zero. AIDA represents a growing multi-sector, very multi-sector group of business leaders and greenhouse gas standards who have operations, exposure, investments, and workforces worldwide. I am thrilled that you can join us today from wherever you are in the world. We have a tremendous diversity of people that are in the audience, actually, from across sectors and borders. We have regulators and investors, technology developers, industry, NGOs, academics, And frankly, I am not surprised at all about the broad interest in the topic of how markets can unlock, scale, and accelerate methane mitigation in the oil and gas sector. The silver linings of the event's year delay and the virtual format is that many of you can now join us and join this discussion. It also, when I was reflecting about just how much has happened in the last 12 months in the methane market space, and how we will get certainly some of the latest and greatest about what is occurring around the world in these markets as they're evolving. So, as I think many of us are seeing and living right now with the investors, the governments, and now really thousands of companies putting forward ambitious climate goals and these net zero commitments, I think we're only at the beginning of a long and promising journey for methane action in oil and gas. And I think we can all agree that with the right policy and price signals, carbon markets, and really their underlying tools and protocols hold the promise of unlocking massive dollars into methane mitigation. But we have a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do in cooperating quickly in order to really maximize this potential. So with that, today's fantastic panel will take stock of key markets for methane, along with what's on the horizon for new and emerging opportunities and best practice exchanges. We have a really complementary lineup of experts. They will share practical experience and guidance on methane mitigation technologies, enabling policies, finance assurance, and protocol development. So I will not be going through the deep, incredible bios for each speaker. Those have already been posted on the GMI website. But very briefly, we will have Yvan Champagne, so President, Blue Source Methane, will kick us off. And then we'll move to Rob Hamliuk. He's the Executive Director, Climate Change Policy, Alberta Government, for regulators' perspective. And then we go to Mike Cote, President, Ruby Canyon Environmental, more from MRV assurance perspective. Then we'll hop across the pond, Atlantic Ocean, to Michiel. And Michiel ten Hoopen is the founding director of Clear Blue Markets. Michiel will give us a deeper dive into actually a really interesting and quite nascent market that we're seeing on upstream emission reductions in Europe. And then Jamie Callender, who is the Vice President, Project Investments in Lancis Fund, more from that finance investor perspective. So that is a high-level lineup. And I think just housekeeping-wise, again, just that reminder, please do keep yourself on mute, unless you're Yvan Champagne. But we can all see each other and your comments, which are great. That dashboard, James had put up that snapshot, that Teams dashboard below. Do not be shy over the course of the entire event. You can put up your hand, your little virtual hand, later on after the tee-up presentations, but that bubble box for the comments, feel free to start, typing up any comments or questions for clarification as soon as you want to. And we will actually start to, and myself or our speakers, respond to some of that over the course of the event to try to tackle as many as possible. And then before we can all come together for the more moderated interactive discussion at the end. All right, I hope that's clear. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Yvan in order to kind of set the stage high level. To be clear, Yvan has been a good friend, fellow traveler for a long time as president of Blue Source Methane, really driving real results climate-wise and overseeing Blue Source's emphasis on fugitive methane emissions, and really with a specific emphasis in Canada. Also, Yvan has been a long time co-chair of AIDA's Canadian working group, but we do have the pleasure of also having a lot of activity and exchanges globally. So with that, Yvan, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thank you, Katie. Really appreciate the intro, and thanks again to the GMI for this great opportunity and initiative to bring people together, sharing ideas on solutions. If you can please forward to the next slide. Thank you. Katie has us on a very tight leash this morning. I think we've got about 10 minutes to get through this, so I will try to be as concise as I can. What I wanted to do is share a bit of insights from what we have seen over the past 3+ years, executing one of the largest methane reduction initiatives in Canada in the oil and gas sector. And so I hope some of our observations, insights can be of use and are helpful to regulators, to other oil and gas companies, market practitioners, solution providers across the world to help, again, accelerate methane action. Next slide, please. First, just a quick bit about Blue Source. Blue Source is one of North America's largest carbon and environmental market firms. We've been in business for over 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, which is very exciting. We've also been recognized over the past 6 years as the best project developer for North American markets. The company that I run, Blue Source Methane, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Blue Source. It is a special purpose vehicle that we set up over 3 years ago to specifically tackle methane reductions in the oil and gas sector in Alberta and beyond. Next slide, please. So what have we been up to over the past 3.5 years? Some of you who have participated in webinars with GMI before may be familiar with our program. I believe, James, we presented about a 1.5 years ago, giving an update at that time. So just to provide a quick update on that, what we've been executing is a high to low bleed pneumatic controller retrofit program across the province of Alberta. So for the past 38 months, we've inventoried over 60,000 pneumatic devices, gas-driven pneumatic devices across the province. We've replaced, removed, or retrofitted over 11,000 of those devices for 35 different oil and gas companies. In the image to the right on the slide, what you can see is the province of Alberta in Canada, and the cutout is basically a snapshot demonstrating all of the different sites across the province, primarily along the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains, which is where the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin is based, the largest part of where Alberta's oil and gas activities is concentrated. We're very excited about the impact we've had. Each device that we have replaced over that time has removed, on average, around 67 tons per year CO2e of emissions. We're on track to deliver about 3 million tons in reductions by the end of Q4 2022. Now, how have we been able to execute this? I can't get into the details of the secret sauce and how we've been able to implement this program, but what I can say is that we have been successful at doing this in part because we've had well-designed regulations, a regulator and a government that has allowed and provided a role for carbon finance, which we have been able to use. We have regulations in Alberta, in Canada, so Environment Canada, along with Alberta Environment, have collaboratively developed regulations to target specific sources of methane in the oil and gas sector and provided clear timelines for when certain technologies or sources of emissions need to be removed. That provides industry with a clear target and a stick. We also have a compliance market. Alberta has an offset market. It has a greenhouse gas market with a strong price signal. We also have an offset protocol for controller retrofits. And combined with an early action period, it has provided us the means, the mechanism to pursue these opportunities and again, to accelerate action. So working with ourselves, technology, EPC, and oil and gas service company partners, we effectively provided a full service solution to the oil and gas sector to help, and that includes capital, providing inventory and installation services, project management, logistics, data management, greenhouse gas quantification, marketing, contracting, sales. And as a result, we were really able to pull forward reductions that otherwise wouldn't have occurred as early as they did. Next slide, please. So based on the initial experience we've had and success we've had with this program, we're currently in the process of expanding our program into other technology areas, including instrument air systems, solar chemical injection pumps, vent gas conservation and combustion, as well as international expansion. So looking at opportunities outside of Canada. Next slide, please. So what are some of the key insights that I want to share? First, methane, I think, is, I don't want to say uniquely, but is especially positioned to provide quick wins to jurisdictions. That's a result of the GWP value of methane, but it's also the type of projects and the types of opportunities that are there. There is some low-hanging fruit in methane. We think it should be one of the priorities for regulators in terms of how you approach greenhouse gas mitigations. Two, we think Canada has provided an exceptional template to other jurisdictions for tackling this in a way that the sector can get on board. And I'll speak to that quickly. Next slide. Third thing is I want to talk about the power of the positive price signal. The difference between getting a price for a unit of reduction that you create versus a tax. We believe, in our experience, dealing with over the past number of years, over 45, probably 50 different oil and gas companies, that positive price is a far better incentive to mobilizing action in the sector than a tax. Oil and gas as a sector understands markets. And I think this type of tool can be exceptionally effective in, again, accelerating action. Next point I'd make is that I believe personally that it's very important to get the oil and gas sector in the tent, to be on the side of the angels, if you will, mobilizing for climate action. I believe that markets really help provide an entryway for the sector to understand that they can be part of the solution. And we think that the significant amount of human capital, ingenuity, risk-taking, capital allocation, all of the great things and expertise that resides in the oil and gas sector, I think we will get there. We will help deliver more reductions faster if we have them along as fellow travelers. Next slide, please. Another point I'd make is methane. We've seen in other jurisdictions, regulators, governments make an artificial distinction between biological methane from agriculture, for example, versus methane that is emitted in the oil and gas sector. At the end of the day, the atmosphere doesn't care. That molecule looks the same. And all of us have, I think, a shared objective to try to reduce the amount of methane that is getting to the atmosphere. And so we believe if there's equitable treatment, we think the oil and gas sector provides a much faster opportunity to deliver measurable, meaningful methane reductions. Excuse me. And then finally, I'd just like to make a point around markets. In our experience, the 35 companies that we've worked with in our program, we've seen different cultures, corporate cultures, different approaches to climate change. And I think one of the key themes that we've seen is that this positive price signal, this market opportunity, provides a great incentive in terms of unlocking and maybe opening the door for cultures that are perhaps resistant to climate action. And we think, again, this is very important in trying to get the sector on side and at the table in a positive fashion. You can just go to the next slide. The one last point I'd make is that, I think one of the common experiences that the world has faced over the past 18 or year or so has been the impact of COVID. The impact has been significant. What's very interesting is that the program that we've had through COVID, prior to COVID, when Alberta was facing a pretty difficult situation economically, the type of work that we were performing out in the field was a very important economic stimulus program, if you will, for the oil and gas sector. I'd encourage other jurisdictions that are looking at recovery that methane reductions offers a unique opportunity in that respect as well. And I'll stop there. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you so much, Ivan. I think that was spot on, and doing it crisply, sticking to time, providing obviously the details of the Blue Source methane experience in Canada, but what those really great key lessons are to kind of set that stage for other presentations and then a discussion later on. So power price, I got this, power of positive price signal, oil and gas sector in the tent, the pulling forward of reductions, right, and how critical that is, and the quick wins. I also love the fact that you raised at the end that possible link connecting the dots around economic recovery stimulus and the opportunities for methane reduction in oil and gas. So that's fantastic. Thank you. You can take a bit of a break, but don't go anywhere, Yvan, because what we'll do now is I'll ask Rob Hamliet to come on stage with us. Put on your video, Rob, because we're going to learn more about, from the regulator's perspective, the Alberta experience. And it's not random that you've been invited here. I think obviously Dan gave a bit of some teasers around the Alberta experience, but you also have the new IEA methane and oil and gas report and toolkit that came out in January, right? And if you dig into that dashboard toolkit around kind of leaders' experiences from jurisdictions globally, Alberta's right there. And so, Rob, why don't you tell us more about your kind of the evolution of Alberta's regulatory landscape and how that has really achieved some of the action and acceleration of methane and oil and gas. Rob?
Okay. Yeah, great. Thanks, Katie. Can you see my video?
I can now, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So again, thank you to GMI as well as Katie for inviting me to this event and letting me share some of Alberta's experience from a policy developer perspective, but also regulatory implementation perspective. So I'm just going to give as Katie mentioned, a brief overview of the way we set up the policy in Alberta to really achieve some significant action in the form of methane emission reductions. So next slide, please. So just a bit of a quick snapshot in terms of Alberta's approach. So we've taken, building off Yvan's analogy, a carrot and stick approach to methane reduction policy within the province of Alberta. So basically what this entails is setting up a regulation which mandates certain activities and actions for upstream oil and gas producers to reduce their methane emissions. And this really provides, the regulatory piece is important and useful as it provides, some certainty in terms of the reductions that will be achieved. It enables some focus on, maybe some obvious opportunities, some low-hanging fruit. Also provides, standards and best practice requirements around measurement, monitoring, verification type of activities. But what we've seen in Alberta is, the regulation is good, but, we, as Katie mentioned, there's some pretty ambitious commitments and desires in terms of methane emission reductions into the future. And in order to unlock those opportunities and unlock that action, we need to use a broader set of tools in the toolbox, and we need to, get, everything at our disposal on the table. And also, as Yvan mentioned, utilize the market and the players in the market to help us get there. So to that end, we use a market-based approach as well that complements the regulatory system that we have in play. And I'll get into that in a second. And then finally, we complement the market-based approach and the regulatory approach further, by, as government, developing funding programs, supports to industry, technology developers, service providers, to be able to ultimately accelerate action and accelerate methane emission reductions more quickly. So all of this leads to, the commitment of the province of Alberta to reduce methane emissions by 45% off to 2014 baseline level. So next slide, please. So just getting quickly into each of the components of Alberta's approach. As I mentioned, the methane regulation, which we had come into play January 1, 2020. And again, this provides, some certainty to government, but also industry in terms of the requirements in place for reducing methane emissions, whether it be venting or fugitive emissions from particular equipment types or processes. As well, this regulation stipulates requirements around measurement, monitoring, verification, which we know, is a pretty significant area of focus as we, get better technology and better data that's informing these emissions in terms of their level and where they're occurring. So the unique thing about Alberta's regulation is it was designed with industry and stakeholders. It was designed in a way to be as cost effective as possible in terms of cost to industry, but also unlocking some flexibility and innovation within the regulation itself. So some of the ways that we've done that is through enabling operators to potentially deploy or utilize alternative technologies to, say, measurement or identification of leaks, other technology than what's currently commercially available today. So it enables some of that innovative technology to be brought forward and be enabled by that regulation itself. It also provides some flexibility in terms of some of the requirements in the regulation, potentially around frequency or LDAR, leak detection and repair type programs, taking a risk-based approach to really focus where the issues are and having that risk-based assessment informed by data. So there is some flexibility within the regulation. Next slide, please. But the regulation itself can't really drive those innovative technology development deployment that we need to reach some of these ambitious commitments and targets. So to that, we utilize our existing carbon market, which Alberta has had in play since 2007. We've had a regulation focused on what we call large final emitters, so large industry, which requires reductions on an annual basis. And to comply with this regulation, these folks can either pay into the fund, we call it the Technology Innovation Emission Reduction Fund, at the carbon price of the day, which is $40 per ton here in Alberta today. They can purchase what we call emissions performance credits, but essentially reductions from other regulated facilities, or of interest today for this discussion, they can purchase what we call Alberta emission offset credits. So credits from voluntary actions that are not directly regulated under this regulation. So that could include a number of activities, but for discussion today, methane reduction activities. We currently have, I believe, 3 protocols, offset protocols for methane reductions. Pneumatics, engine fuel management, vent gas capture, solution gas are the protocols in play, with other protocols likely to be developed and some flexibility within the protocols. But what this does is it enables the market to do its thing, basically. And getting on a Van's point of, industry understands markets and can utilize markets. We have service providers in Alberta that are doing their thing in the market in terms of bringing these emission reductions to the market to bear. We have technology service providers and technology providers that are looking at the opportunity created by this market and developing innovative technologies to further reduce methane emissions at low cost to industry and government as a whole. So there's innovation, constant innovation being unlocked, and significant momentum created from this market and from the opportunity that the market presents. Based off the numbers that I've seen in terms of the pneumatics protocol itself in the offset system, we had about 2.3 million tons of reductions registered on the registry, and that was a snapshot from, I believe, a couple months ago. Evan, in his presentation, noted that they're alone going to get 3 million tons by Q4 2022. So there's significant momentum building in the marketplace and a real opportunity to drive further reduction. So it essentially does 2 things, really. It incents early action and provides that, bringing forward of reductions in advance of regulatory requirements. And beyond that, it incents action and reductions beyond regulatory requirements and provides that incentive for facilities and industry. So maybe that's all I'll say on that slide. Next slide, please. And then just the third component of Alberta's approach is the programming and direct funding. So, we're seeing a lot of activity through the regulation, through the market approach, but there's still some gaps and support needed to accelerate reductions. And so we've recycled compliance revenue from our greenhouse gas pricing system into some of these innovative technologies, into some of these alternative ways to measure, monitor, to increase the data quality and inventory of our methane emissions. So ultimately we can, better reduce emissions. So we have a number of programs that we've announced recently, and this is to Yvan's and Katie's point around economic recovery. Methane is a great, and methane funding and projects is a great way to spur economic activity right away and enable some of the recovery from what we've seen with COVID. So to that end, we've announced 750 million this year to greenhouse gas reducing projects. 52 of that directly will be to methane. There'll be a component of that to implementing equipment on site. There'll be a component of that to helping small players increase their capacity, develop their inventory, so ultimately they know what investments are available to them or can participate in the market and achieve those reductions. And then finally, we have a program that enables industry to come together in Alberta to find solutions on the side of measurement, monitoring, and some innovative approaches like satellite, drone measurement techniques or technology that's an improvement on what we see today in terms of some of the more manual handheld devices. So there's significant opportunity there to accelerate some action and ultimately unlock further reductions in this space. And then finally, I just want to give a plug to our industry itself and some of the initiatives that they're doing on their own to be able to unlock some of these technologies and opportunities. We have the Petroleum Technology Alliance of Canada, which is funded fully by industry, but provides programming in terms of research, development, and ultimately deployment and availability of this technology to the sector as a whole. So maybe, Katie, I'll stop there. I think I'm at the end of my time.
Hello. Yeah, no, I think right on time, Rob. And again, well put. I think it's fair for me to say Rob, you and your team, because AIDA has been so engaged in Alberta since, leading into 2007, as you point out, there's a ton of experience, right? When you're looking at over 15 years, first compliance carbon emissions trading system in North America, right? And the frequent and authentic engagement that you've had with industry players and stakeholders throughout the process. And there's been quite the evolution and modifications, right? I don't have to tell you that, Rob. But it really is quite a model around stakeholder engagement, as you say, also like a well-designed program where you are working hand in hand with businesses, again, the industry players, to unlock flexibilities and innovation, right, across that space. So I think extremely well put to set that stage for us, Rob. But like I said to Yvan, please don't go anywhere because we'll now head to Mike Cote. But we'll come back for that discussion later. And a reminder to the audience that you can, and I encourage you to submit some of those comments in the chat box function there. So feel free to questions of clarification. Our speakers are on hand to even just type in their answers before we get to the moderated Q&A later on. So again, thank you, Rob, for the Alberta experience perspective. And Michael Cote, if I could ask you to go on camera. Mike?
Hello. Okay.
Hello. All right. So
I think the camera's working.
It's working. I can hear you loud and clear. Okay, so there we go. Some scene setter, but obviously there is very much of a Canadian love perspective about from Yvan and Rob, right? You and your team at Ruby Canyon Environmental certainly have loads of Alberta and broader Canada experience in the assurance space, right?
Yes.
But you also have a lot of experience in other parts of the world, including the US and also voluntary markets. So we've asked you to actually cover quite a bit in 8 to 10 minutes, but to really shed light on some of the targeted opportunities we're seeing for methane protocol development in the US, also just broadly on voluntary. And I should say, you and your team, Ruby Canyon Environmental, worked together for many years, but it was also you had introduced us to GMI and GMF several years ago when GMF came to Toronto. So it's really thanks to Mike that we have partnered on this event. And it's so interesting to see how things have evolved over the last 5-6 years even. So Mike, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Katie. I'll just give you 30 seconds on Ruby Canyon. We're a small business located in Western Colorado in the U.S. And we work. We're gonna travel a little bit south from my predecessors, and most of our work currently is in North and South America. I'm not going to talk too much about our Canadian experience due to the fact that there's many other. There's much more information provided previously on the Canadian markets. And we're 15 employees, and we've been in business for about 15 years as greenhouse gas consultants, also methodology developers. But most of what we do is we're third-party assurance providers. We're accredited greenhouse gas verification, validation, and verification company. And most of our work throughout North and South America is in voluntary markets and some compliance markets. We do greenhouse gas inventories, verifications. We do a lot of facility reporting assurance, obviously, offset projects, including many in the oil and gas sector. And we also do methodology, not just development, but we do methodology validations for VCS as well. And in the past, we've also been part of AIDA, I think I should mention, for the past 7 years. So I've known Katie for quite a while. Next slide, please. Well, I think that what's becoming clear, certainly in our experience, is that if we talk about, targeting oil and gas companies, or if you're trying to design some kind of policy for oil and gas companies and methane reductions, what works for one type of company doesn't necessarily work for another. And also some of the multinationals and majors are so far ahead of the small companies that, the types of incentives that you need are very different. The thresholds for financial benefits are very different. And so we see all of this, I think, from the work that we do, particularly in the US, where there's a lot of large independents and small operators across the country. I mean, thousands of companies. We've also had the benefit of experience working with a couple of state-owned companies, primarily Pemex in Mexico and Ecopetrol in Colombia. And I can say that, and a little bit with Petrobras. And even within state-owned companies, you'll find that the corporate cultures are very, very different from each other. Next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about the US. And for at least for our services that we provide for third-party assurance, we've not had a lot of activity with the multinationals. And I think in some reasons, they're ahead of everybody else in terms of having business as usual and best practices being adopted throughout and integrated throughout their systems. Most of those companies have already done greenhouse gas inventories. They have sustainability goals. They're producing climate action plans. They're setting emission reduction targets. They're watching their ESG scores. And so, those companies are very much dialed in, but that's not really the bulk of what we see in the industry in the US. There's actually over 9,000 independent oil and gas producers in the US. And while many of these may be considered large companies, most of them are not. They're very small companies. And some of them, in fact, many of them are just, they're located in one state in a single play, very domestic focused. And some of them are very, very small, may only have a few dozen employees and manages 30 or 40 wells. So how do you target companies like that? And there's very fewer sustainability practices in place with those kind of companies. And so it's actually a different approach. And the service companies, recently we've been approached by a number of service companies that are actually the ones installing the equipment or using their own technologies or developing new technologies to reduce methane emissions, capture more gas along the stream. And the service companies are now interested to understand, well, if there's some value added in a voluntary carbon market credit, then what's that all about? And so I think our experience has been 10 years ago, we had targeted and approached a lot of oil and gas companies in the US. And the answer was pretty much, no, we're not interested in participating in the carbon markets. And that's been going on for quite a while. But I have to say that, just in the last 6 months, the level of interest has increased exponentially. Next slide, please. Well, let me talk a little bit about protocols in terms of the voluntary market and what we have to use. These are our tools. And so right now, if you go through the list of CDM protocols that you can also use in VCS or American Carbon Registry or the Canadian Standards Association, I mean, this is what you have to pick from. And interestingly enough, it's, a lot of them are circling around very similar things regarding reducing flaring. And but we have 8 different protocols, and the first 7 here are all focused on flare reduction. But part of the problem is many of these protocols are written with a very specific project in mind. So, for example, if I have, if we want to use, so let's say solution gas, to use the solution gas, treat it, generate electricity, none of these protocols really fit. And if you look at the ACM9 AM9, excuse me, recovery of gas from associated gas and lift gas, but you have to put it into a pipeline that's at least 1 million cubic meters a day. AM37, yeah, you can recover associated gas as well, but it must be used as a feedstock in a chemical process. And so this goes on with several of the others. AM55 moves downstream a bit, so you're recovering refinery gas, but it must be used for process heat. So you have to go down the list if you're wanting to generate electricity. You almost need to go to one of the waste energy recovery protocols, because none of the flare gas recovery protocols allow for electric power generation. And then we have our small scale and large scale methodologies, as any of you that are familiar with the whole CDM process. And so, with the small scale methodologies, if your project is less than 60,000 tons a year, you get to use the streamlined additionality approach. And so, which is a very, very different than the large scale methodologies. And so it ends up being quite complicated very fast. And there's almost too many of these out there, and where one more ubiquitous protocol may be in order. And we can go to the next slide, and I can talk to you about, well, what does this produce in the voluntary market? And keep in mind that I've excluded the Canadian projects. There are several dozen Canadian projects in the Canadian Standards Association Greenhouse Gas Project Registry. But these projects here are throughout the CDM world, VCS, and also our registry Sur Carbono, located in Colombia. And you can see that post-Kyoto, post-2012, there's really been very few projects that have been using these protocols, in spite of the fact that there's 8 of them out there. And I should point out that the last time we've used this is in 2019 for a couple of projects in Colombia. Interestingly enough, and you look off to the right, in 2020, there's 5 LiDAR projects, advanced LiDAR projects in Bangladesh that got registered in CDM just last year. And so that's kind of interesting. And we also feel like the Sur Carbono protocol in Colombia did try to consolidate a number of these other CDM methodologies that are currently there in an attempt to try to bridge some of these together. I should point out that there's that British Columbia and Alberta have their own protocols, and there are let's see, there's one protocol pending in British Columbia, and there's 2 current protocols in Alberta for offset projects. And I think that what we find is outside of we feel like Alberta is really the proving ground for the number of projects that are there, the activities there, the carbon price that's there, and hopefully that will be extended southward into these other North and South American markets. But I think we need to maybe have a little bit of evolution with the protocols that we're working with. Let me go to the next slide. As I mentioned, a more universally applicable flare protocol, I believe, is in order. I mean, when you consider that, I mean, flaring is the most carbon-intensive part of oil production. So, we're talking about methane here today, but what you find is that if you incentivize the reduced flaring, you're also going to reduce the venting, and I think that's where some of the anti-flaring regulatory anti-flaring systems that we do see sometimes do backfire, and it actually, well, there's been some studies in Algeria that venting actually increased. And so, we're definitely advocates of the market mechanisms here to be used, and that a more multi-project activities where does it really matter where the flare gas is from? Does it really matter if it comes from solution gas or from tank vapors or from a stripper well? I mean, I don't think that we need a separate protocol for each of those sources. And the same thing on the implementation of activities and usage, whether it's going to pipeline sales or being used for process heat or electric power generation. Do those really need to all be separate protocols improving themselves on a project level? So the other part of this is, over the past quite a few years in North America, performance-based offset project standards is really what we see. We try to get away from the individual project additionality assessments, demonstrating financial additionality, showing that you've overcome a bunch of technical barriers. I mean, that just may not be able to be fully demonstrated in this sector, but it doesn't mean that we can't set some kind of a performance standard that decides, well, this project's in or this project's out, to simplify and streamline things. Another thing to consider with new protocols is also that other CO2-based protocols, as I mentioned, just reducing the CO2 from flaring also reduces methane emissions. And we've been talking to some groups lately that are actually more interested in trying to find a way to, if we shut in oil and gas wells early, and I think, that it kind of underscores some of the things that Yvonne said about moving things up, doing things early, accelerating the emission reductions. We find that there is a genuine interest out there as a number of wells in the U.S. That can be referred to as kind of suspended wells or stripper wells, very low production wells, just doing 10 or 20 barrels a day. But there's actually like 400,000 of those wells. And moving the wells onto retirement, not allowing them to get into an orphan state where they're leaking methane, should be incentivized. But this also brings up, an interesting question of the whole supply side climate change solution. I mean, are emissions avoided from not producing that oil? How real are those? How do we deal with the leakage side of that? Because certainly some of that oil will be produced somewhere else. But there's lots of information on the life cycle assessments of oil production, and even on a just basin by basin basis. So I think the information is there to come up with a quantification method for this idea. And then finally, the P&A of orphaned wells. There's been a lot of talk lately, and especially in the U.S., about how there's 2.5 million orphan wells, lots of them leaking methane all over the country. I think there's another 100. There's also many orphan wells in Canada in addition to that. And you can argue that, well, they're all scheduled to be shut in by state programs. There's going to be federal money available to do that. But those 2.5 million wells, like most things, probably 90% of the emissions are coming from 10% of the wells. So how do we move those high methane emitters to the top of the list? And even though that they might eventually be P&A'd, 10 years from now. And so I think that incentivizing that, that's a protocol that's already in the works and may be coming available for public comment in the coming months. Next slide, please. Well, finally, I just wanted to show that, mention like I did before, that there's there's been a real renewed interest in oil and gas sector projects, at least from the people that are knocking on our door. And I think that there's a number of key drivers. Of course, back at the beginning of the pandemic, $30 oil prices made a big difference. In the U.S. markets, we've had, notoriously low gas prices for 3 or 4 years now. That doesn't appear to be changing too much. We see a lot of companies coming to us talking about their ESG scores and needing to increase their ESG scores through climate change actions. We're also seeing, investors that are limiting, who they invest their money in for new development, depending on the carbon neutrality of the company. And then some of the big companies, you've seen announcements, are coming up with their own carbon neutrality goals. And out here in Colorado, and now more recently in New Mexico, we actually have state regulation requiring the use of associated gas. And finally, it's also interesting, I think, that for a market that we didn't get a lot of interest 10 years ago, I'm getting a lot of questions now, just trying to understand how carbon markets work, what's a carbon credit, who buys carbon credits, what all about the eligibility and applicability of the project ideas that they have. And so we are seeing some real genuine interest in the voluntary carbon market now that we hadn't seen before. Next slide. Thank you. I think that's it. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Mike. And I forgot that that's how you had ended it, the slides, because I smile. Because it's always been busy for us, right, with AIDA, but it seems as though the last, 8 to 10 months, it has just increased in busyness. And, all of these newer actors, the voluntary, plays, the intersect between compliance, pre-compliance, voluntary, right, scaling of learning curves, the investors being driven. It's intense, it's exciting, and it's always nice to be able to actually confidently point to people if I don't have time, like you, Mike, and your team. So thank you, such rich insights there. And I think it is important to underscore, sometimes, we joke around MRV, protocol development, sometimes maybe we need strobe lights, right, in order to really, it's super exciting. It's so critical, though. No protocol, quantification methodologies, no dice in this space. So having that latest stock take that you provided is so important. And I want to just make that clear to the whole audience, how rich those insights are. So thank you very much, Mike. You also, I think, provided a fantastic segue to Michiel's discussion around the UER, and so the upstream emission reduction program that actually was quite nascent when we came together last, Michiel, in probably Madrid at COP in 2019. But there's certainly been a lot more activity occurring, and again, it's keeping you and your team busy at Clearblue. So by way of just a better mini intro, Michiel has been in the carbon market space for many years, formerly at Vattenfall, and EcoSecurities, actually, major carbon fund back in the day with CDM, and founded Clearblue Markets several years back. Clearblue and the team is providing advisory services across these environmental markets, the low carbon fuels markets, certainly the cap and trade markets, with a host of clients. And I know Michiel is particularly busy with the new-ish upstream emission reductions market in Europe. So we've asked you, Michiel, to provide just a glimpse of what's going on in that program. Some of the unique qualities also intersect with the EU ETS, but also the connectivity with some of the methodologies that Mike actually just talked about for recognition under this compliance European market. So Michiel, come on video, please.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you, GMI, for organizing this. I was indeed just going to compliment you, Katie, for the order in which you organize our presentations now, because this hooks up very well with Michael's presentation, as upstream emission reductions are a very specific and definitely higher value compared to voluntary markets, but very specific markets for projects in this space. Also, maybe to link with the first two presentations and to quickly explain what it's all about, the carrot and the stick. In this case, the stick is actually on European companies that bring fuel into the European market. They have an obligation to reduce. And the carrot is actually with any project in upstream oil and gas anywhere in the world that can reduce emissions. And of course, reducing methane emissions is a big part of that. We can go to the next slide. Well, Katie just explained what we do as well. Maybe just to explain our background, with 3 colleagues indeed from Vattenfall, European utility, the third biggest emitter back then in the European market. Back in 2015, with those 3 colleagues, we essentially left the European market and started a company in Ontario, taking our experience to the new markets there. And from there, we've grown into the broader North American and European markets. We are now a team of 16. We can get the next one. So UER. So what drives the market, so the demand side for UERs, is the European Fuel Quality Directive. That directive is indeed about fuel quality. So the goal is that you should be able to drive a car around in Europe. So the fuel quality, the physical quality should be the same or at least very similar. But that same directive also puts a 6% CO2 reduction obligation on any company selling fuel into road transportation in Europe. I guess a lot of you are familiar with the EU ETS, a big traded allowance, a CO2 market in Europe. Unfortunately, the FQD is very different. The EU ETS is a harmonized market, so it functions as one market. And to summarize, if you compare between the different countries in the EU, the UER space is a bit of a mess, with every country doing its own thing. But to quickly explain what drives demand again, so if you want to achieve a 6% reduction target, the main ways of achieving that are to blend in biofuels, but there you also face restrictions because there's also a maximum on how much biofuel you can actually blend in. It can also be electric cars, it can be e-fuels, but as you may suspect, those are relatively expensive options. So the opportunity that the FQD also allows to reduce those costs are to use upstream emission reductions, so offsets coming from any project that directly reduces the emission profile of upstream oil and gas. So that can be methane reduction that we're talking about here. It can also be renewable or energy efficiency. But to be clear, it is only upstream, so it has to be prior to the refinery. And in the natural gas stream, that is a little bit more difficult to establish. As I said, anywhere in the world, and you don't need to show that your project, your country actually supplies crude oil or natural gas into Europe. So there's no link to the physical there. A difficulty is for the market that you need to match the vintage to the year in which you sell the fuel. So the actual ton of CO2 reduced somewhere at your project has to be used within that same year. And banking is not allowed. So that means if you're, I'll talk a little bit about the process, but if you're slow in the process of getting your emission reductions out, it loses all value if you miss the compliance date. If I can have the next one then. I'll go through this quickly, but it's, as I said, a bit of a mess between different countries in the EU making up their own specific rules on what projects they will allow in as UER projects. Germany is by far the most interesting market, but also the most restrictive in what they allow. But they were in that market very early. They were the first to clarify their rules, where some of the major European countries have still not clarified their rules. This is for countries like France, Spain, Italy. We are still waiting for what exactly they allow in. To focus on the German market, which for the year 2020 has seen a very high value for the UERs. That market is still a ton of CO2 there is still far over 200 euros, which is for the offset markets. The other offset markets that I've worked in, at least, an extremely high number. But as I said again, it's per vintage year. So if there's more supply coming in this year or the next year, then those prices, of course, may change drastically. To compare, the other big market in Europe, the UK, that after Brexit seems to have ended its market now, but their prices for 2020 were maybe £60 at the beginning of the year, and now they're around 15, I think. So very different pricing, no transparency in the market at all. So a complicated market, but still an interesting market, especially if you can make it into the German system. To do that, a couple of key requirements. That links to Michael's presentation just now. You can only use a CDM methodology, and not even all of the ones he just showed, because, for instance, flare reduction at a refinery is not allowed because it's not considered upstream. The other key requirement that is specific to Germany only is that it has to be a new project, and then you have to submit some initial documentation, very limited documentation, but to the German government before taking your investment decision. It's essentially part of the additionality assessment. You have a timestamp on it that you were really doing this because of German UERs. The other tricky thing here is, especially compared to other offset markets, not great. There's only a 1-year crediting period. So the market, actually, Germany has recently shown in its draft regulations that they plan to keep this market alive until 2030. But for every year, we would need to find new projects. So maybe I actually missed that on a slide, but on a previous slide. But I am actually sourcing on behalf of a client, Varo Energy. We've been doing that for 2.5 years, so we were fortunately early in the market, and that meant we had enough 2020 UERs where others didn't. But even though we had a lot of projects now, for 2022, for 2023, we still need to source new projects because they only have that 1-year crediting period. Yeah, and the 2020 market, yeah, it is, of course, COVID that led to a lot of projects being delayed. It was also just the fact that it was new. 2020 was the first year that the UER market came alive. So the combination of those two meant that there was limited supply of projects, and that's now grown, fortunately. Let me go to the next slide. So again, this links to Michael's presentation just now, but I'm not showing all of the methodologies that he showed. By the way, Michael, just on a quick note, you mentioned 55 projects. If you look at the UER markets, it's very intransparent. So I would suspect that there are quite a lot of more projects in methane reduction in oil and gas being done that you don't have on your list. For instance, the German government has its own registry, so you won't see that pop up in the CDM or in any other registry. And a country like the UK doesn't even have a registry at all, so there's no market visibility on projects going into that market. Just quickly, because these are, the way I see it, the main methodologies for methane reduction project. So AM9 again, Michael just explained in a bit more detail here. The idea is you indeed need to show that you're selling your gas into a natural gas transmission line. You're selling. It's essentially proof that you sell the gas that you recovered from flaring or venting, and that you sell that to market. But it can also be bottled LPG, by the way. But the tricky thing for methane reduction project, as invented methane, is that if that is your project, you are not in this methodology, so that's not specific to UER rules, but this methodology does not allow you to calculate with the global warming potential of the methane, and you just have to assume that it was flared anyway in the baseline, which is why whenever we see this methodology being used, it's pretty much always avoided gas flaring projects, because those are then the bigger volumes. The other one then, much less common in the UER market, AM23, so leak detection. There you can use the global warming potential of methane, but it's leak detection and repair. The difficulty here is that you need to be prior to a natural gas processing facility. So fixing leaks in a natural gas transmission line, just taking gas to market somewhere, is not eligible as a UER project. Unless you can show that it goes to a gas to liquids plant, making liquid fuel out of the gas later on. But that's, of course, quite an exceptional situation in the world. Then next slide, please. Yeah, so my last slide, just to show specifically for German UERs, all the steps that you need to go through. So find your projects. As I said, you need to go to the German government with some project info before FID. You need to show that essentially German UERs are part of your decision making in that way. Develop a project design document, having it validated by a German accredited auditor. There's quite a list of them now. This is Paris Agreement on the left. You need an LOI from the host country, where the host country doesn't have to actually transfer Article 6 credits, because the rules aren't even there to do that yet. But they do have to indicate that they will make sure that there will be no double use or double counting of those projects. So it's not an approval, it's an LOI. Submitting to the German government, getting it approved, which can take at least 2 months typically. If they ask questions, it takes longer. After that, you can open a registry account, which is also a lengthy process and which is required in order to request the actual issuance. As in any offset project, then having it monitored, having it verified, and then in that registry system, requesting that issuance. So a lot of hoops to go through, but yeah, a big reward at the end, because these credits are very valuable. I think then we can go to my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Michiel. Before you go, so just so we're clear, I mean, this is fascinating, right? Even like there's so many questions that I have that have been sparked from, and it's also inspiring me to maybe have AIDA host a full day on the UER market workshop, virtual workshop. I think just quickly, so we're all clear, when we're talking UER, the prices in Germany, how high again, ballpark?
I think far over 200 euros today still, probably close to 250.
Yeah. And usage limits?
But that is specifically for the 2020 one, so the year that's already over. And
right.
That is because, as I said, of the market being new. And so we started doing this over 2.5 years ago, which was just about right for the timing, because as most people on this call would know, it takes a while to get projects developed, and even more so in the oil and gas sector.
Yeah.
And then COVID came in and delayed a couple of our projects as well, actually. So, yeah.
And if the supply of UER credits are not available for compliance, what's the other compliance option? They only, if the credits are not available, right, for compliance, they pay up?
Yeah. So sorry. So it's if you haven't actually physically done anything or not enough in the physical world, so with biofuel blending, and you don't have the UERs either, then there's a penalty. but that penalty is 470 euros, and it's slowly going up even over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
So you need to have either your physical reductions or your UERs in. That also makes it a difficult position to manage on the compliance side, because you're buying UERs, not knowing if your project will be successful, if it's having a lot of delays. So it's an interesting play.
Interesting, and a big bite if you aren't actually properly planning and managing. Okay, we have to go on, but thank you very much. Still don't go anywhere, because we will have some a few minutes at least for some questions. Jamie, so put yourself on video, please. We have Jamie Callender now with Atlantis, kind of hopping, at least physically and storyline-wise, back across the Atlantic. And Jamie, you have been in the space, carbon markets, for a long time, like all of us. You are now Vice President, Project Investments at Atlantis Fund. And you're responsible for investment due diligence, project origination, portfolio management for the fund's GHG emission reduction clean fuel investments. So Jamie, why don't you provide that snapshot from that investor perspective on why Atlantis is playing and will continue likely to play across these markets, methane for oil and gas, reduction opportunities, and also the suitability, right, from your vantage point around markets and these markets working again through an voluntary investor kind of perspective to get into this this space. So Jamie, I will pass it to you.
Great, thank you very much, Katie, for the introduction. And you can skip ahead to the next slide, Sam. So I'll start just with a bit of an introduction to Atlantis, because we're not really a household name. We tend to be behind the scenes, providing financing to developers, and so we're not typically a well-known entity. But we've been around since 2017. We were set up by a partnership between Fondation and Coop Carbone, so headquartered in Quebec, but with management team members in British Columbia, California, and Quebec. So we are a Canadian investment fund that is exclusively focused on financing greenhouse gas reduction projects, and that covers both carbon markets and clean fuels markets in North America. What I think tried to summarize in this snapshot really is that in the last 3 years since our first investment closed, we've now put together a portfolio of around 35 projects. And this map illustrates that. What you'll notice is that methane features in almost all of these projects, and that is for a reason, and we'll get into that in a later slide. But the map also, you'll notice, highlights Alberta, and it's not because I used to live in Alberta or that it's the center of the universe. It's actually that we financed one of our earlier investments was in partnership with Blue Source, the program Yvan mentioned, which was a very large number of installations across the province. So trying to draw those little dots would have been a little challenging. But in terms of results, we've really generated scalable results to date, more than 4 million tons of GHG reductions over the last 3 years cumulatively. And we think over the life of the fund, with 10 years, it'll be around 12 million tons. And so what that's led to is really proving out the business model for Fund 1 and getting us ready to launch Fund 2. And so we hope to basically be in a position to start fundraising in the next few months. And it's an exciting time with a lot happening in the markets. So I will ask Sam just to go to the next slide. This is really a slide that's trying to make the point of, well, why have we focused so much on methane? And that's methane across agriculture, across oil and gas, across mining, in both sides of the border in Canada and the US. And what I've got here is units of US dollars per gigajoule for a unit of methane. The left bar there in brown is the brown gas, which is natural gas sold into the pipeline in North America. It is very cheap, $2 to $3 gigajoule, give or take. Maybe not accounting for the storms last week that drove up prices in the short term, but aside from that, fairly low value. What's interesting based on the examples Yvan and Rob were giving, if you took an Alberta upstream oil and gas facility and you did a methane reduction project there and jumped through all of the hoops to create a carbon offset, you would be adding in the neighborhood of another $13 US per gigajoule to the value of that brown gas. So it's a very substantial increase. And if you were to do something similar in the US, say at a coal mine, and you were to sell an offset into the California program, you'd be adding around $6. So to give you a sense of the carbon price difference, Alberta's price is much higher than California's. And so there's a better value. But I didn't plot the California example, just thought it was relevant to mention the same principle would apply with just a lower number. The next bar, the third one there, is actually kind of interesting because if you take landfill methane and you capture that methane, clean it up, remove all the impurities, and you put it in a pipeline as pure methane, so renewable natural gas, and generate federal renewable fuel standard credits. So RFS credits are called RINs, and D3 RINs are the type that you would get for a landfill project. You are adding on the order of about $28 per gigajoule from that. And there's also a potential stacking opportunity under the California LCFS program for that same use. So that gas is, when you add the LCFS in, it is all in all, approximately $38 a gigajoule. It's very significant. All of these are using a 25 times global warming potential. There's lots of assumptions based in this. I won't go into all of them. But then most perhaps interesting today, and where the real gold rush is dairy manure and swine manure as well. But basically, if you take manure that was going into a lagoon, breaking down in a lagoon and venting methane to the atmosphere, and you redirect that into an anaerobic digester, you create biogas, and then clean that up to produce pure methane, put it in a pipeline, and apply it to the California LCFS program, so the Low Carbon Fuel Standard program, and stack the federal renewable fuel standard credits on top of that, you're talking $90 per gigajoule. And so talking to any oil and gas operator in Alberta, they will definitely, their eyes will open pretty wide in that scenario. So that's something why there are a lot of very popular dairymen out there in the U.S. today with very large herds of dairy cows. But if there's really kind of three takeaways from this slide, it's one, if you put a carbon price on a unit of vented methane, it will create a tremendous amount of investor interest and activity, and capital will flow into that area. Secondly, the ability to stack credits and not necessarily get completely fussed about overlapping of different programs, which is a real concern from a lot of different policymakers, you again will really drive activity. There's a lot of different discussions to be had on that topic, but price ultimately makes a huge difference. And lastly, I would say you can almost ignore the value of the underlying natural gas commodity. It's not driving the investment decisions in any way, shape, or form for most of these projects. There's always an exception, but ultimately these are projects that are driven by the environmental markets and the value of those attributes, whether they be carbon credits or LCFS credits or RINs credits. So if you can go to my last slide, please. And this last slide, I won't go through all of it, but the intent here is to try to take an investor perspective and look at sort of 7 risk categories or program design elements that policymakers and others who are advocating to policymakers to really keep in mind. And what I've tried to do is give a positive example of an existing program that has got some good features, and then also give some challenging examples where some of these programs, are much more challenging for investors, and ultimately capital is often left on the sidelines as a result of some of these types of issues. So the big elephant in the room for any investor in an environmental market is election risk and political risk, and that's fairly self-explanatory, but a bipartisan program with good industry buy-in across different sectors and different stakeholders that can stand the test of time and stand the test of elections is critical, at least to try. Next down is really program risk. And so two that I really like are the California programs that have regulations in place to 2030. So it gives you that runway as an investor to make an investment decision. On the flip side, programs that are going to expire in 2022, even if they barely launched, like the Canadian federal offset system, are incredibly difficult to make any case for investing in currently. At the project type level, regulatory risk is critical. Essentially, any of these activities have to be voluntary initiatives in order to generate some type of credit. Others have spoken before me on the carrot and the stick concept. Alberta obviously has a good example. California had a somewhat similar example where they said to the livestock sector, we will not regulate you before the end of 2024, but we expect you to achieve a 40% reduction in methane emissions. And so that sector is a clear signal to go and use the LCFS program, retrofit their farms, and put in methane reduction technology. On the pricing side, a good example here that provides some nice stability is the cap and trade program between California and Quebec. There's a floor price with a 5% escalator and an inflation adjustment. So that's a really nice feature that gives you that, again, visibility into where things are going to go. A lot of programs focus on a ceiling price, which is logical for compliance entities, but I would argue that a floor price may have more value for an investor at least. Number 5 has been talked about by others in length, but I, again, cannot overstate the importance of protocols and methodologies. Make them public early, get them implemented at the beginning of the program or before the program. Don't wait to get the program up and running and then worry about the protocols. We need liquidity at the very beginning of the program, get the investor interest, get the program going. And Alberta is a good example of this. California, the LCFS program is another example where creativity has been really driven by the flexibility of allowing different project types, different technology types. So the last 2 points, really simple one for crediting period, give investors that runway and that certainty, whether it's a 10-year crediting period, but something that drives recurring revenues. There's a lot of rebate type programs out there that just give you a one-time rebate. And those really make it hard for investors to get involved and provide third-party financing. So I really would suggest veering towards a recurring revenue type of program. And lastly, the details, so call it the all other catch-all category. Things like additionality, McKeel and Michael commented on this at the CDM level. Don't do it at the project level, do it at the program level or the protocol level. Set it in stone up front, make life easier that way. But there's many other details that I won't get into. And I will maybe hand it back to Katie to ask the hard-hitting questions and for people to disagree with any of the positives and negatives I put up on the slide. Thank you.
Well, I don't disagree with any of it. I think actually, like, you did a fabulous job as kind of our cleanup hitter of the panel, Jamie, and highlighting those risks and kind of the make or break, certainly that we have seen and continue to see in certain markets, starting with that killer election political risk at the front end, the stroke of pen, right? These markets are so at the mercy of political ebbs and flows in elections. But I think looking at, yes, the clock, I cannot get over how much rich information has been provided. And I'm also really happy that I had a bit of heartburn when we were first organizing this about having slides for each of our speakers, just given lots of great information and not a lot of time, but the slides and having that catalog of slides available to the audience, even those who can't join us, is going to be really invaluable. So thank you. If looking at a couple of minutes, James kind of gifted us a few minutes before I pass the baton back to him for the wrap-up remarks. So you've also done a fantastic job interacting with the audience members who have been sending through their comments in that chat box. So Sam's put on the instructions. And did we, I think this is a good one. So to any of our speakers right now, carbon markets, are any carbon markets applying avoidance carbon credits for LDAR emissions reductions? Maybe that's just a quick one to throw out if there are any quick answers. Who wants to take that one?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, effectively, Michiel talked about the leak detection and repair methodology in the CDM. And so in certain circumstances, there is an opportunity to create UERs from leak detection and repair.
Well, Michiel, projects, just because I don't think we got a little taste of where the projects, the actual host countries of these projects for these UER credits are. So can you provide just like an example of some of the countries that they're originating from?
It started a bit in the Middle East. We ourselves actually did 4 projects in Oman. And then we also saw, I see Carbon Limits was on this call as well. They had some projects in Nigeria. And as with the CDM, funny enough, a little bit later on, China was catching up, and then you saw a lot of projects coming out of China. So that's a bit where it seems to be.
Excellent.
But it can definitely also be Canada, right?
Yeah, that well, you kind of smelled where I was just given. It could be Canada, right?
Yeah, and we have in Lanzas has participated in the UER market with a Canadian project.
Yes, we have. So, Ivan, I think you've been very patient given that you started us off, but I think, where you have now heard the other, presentations and highlights, I think everything quite complimentary to how you set the stage with your key takeaways. But I think that there is some, there's looking at the regulation alone model, right? In certain places like Colorado, for instance, and how that could be superior to more of a hybrid kind of market-based approach like Alberta and elsewhere. So like, how would you just respond to that kind of comment? Yeah,
it's a great question, Katie. And listen, every jurisdiction is different. The oil and gas sector is different in many different jurisdictions. But let me share with you my experience is that the oil and gas sector responds much better to a positive price signal than a stick alone. And if we look at everything that has happened over the last 18 months, and Katie, I go back to COP25 in Madrid, just over even less than a year and a half ago, with Repsol announcing a net zero target by 2050, I believe, followed by other oil and gas companies across the world coming up with similar initiatives. The world has changed in the last 18 months. And what each of these companies is struggling to do is figure out what is their path to that lower carbon future. What does that look like? How do we stay relevant? How do we stay as a going concern? And so my experience is that specifically methane and markets are a great introduction for those companies to understand, hey, this is how we turn something that we see as a challenge to an opportunity. And it's as easy as making the shift from the cost side of the ledger for these organizations. So historically, environmental health and safety, regulatory is a cost center in these companies. But that's not where the, I don't want to say the talent, but the focus of the organization is. The focus of the organization is on the revenue side of the ledger. And so when you shift these activities from the cost side to the revenue side of the ledger, that's where magic happens. I mean, we've seen this with all of the companies we work with. 3 years ago, a lot of these, we provided capital because a lot of companies were not comfortable deploying capital to these areas. There were other areas within the company that had a better return. But what we're seeing now is that the light switch is on. And companies are now, and the question we get asked all the time is, what else can we do? What's next? Where's the other opportunity for us to apply this same type of approach? And that's what we need across the world is companies thinking about this in a different way and accelerating action. And I think you get there a lot faster by providing that carrot than through a stick alone.
Extremely well put, and I think that that is really the ideal way to end things today, given the topic around accelerating methane mitigation, and also where we are already seeing the results. You've all laid it out where we are seeing results. The key now is to see more results and also to be able to take the best bits and replicate it elsewhere in the world, right? So I think that we succeeded in our mission today, at least, but we look forward to making sure that these regular opportunities to engage with everybody in the audience and certainly regularly with GMI as we move forward on this journey. So I just want to really heartfelt thanks to all of our speakers, right? You all did a great job. Yvonne and Rob and Mike and Jamie and Michelle. All those slides will be made available along with the recording. And I saw the contact information spread throughout each of those slide decks. So you'll know where to find everybody, including myself, I'm sure, somewhere. So thank you very much. I will pass it over. I know we've gone over a bit of time. I'll pass it back to James, though, for the sign off. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Katie. And I could echo everything you said and kind of pull off of the last statement that Yvonne was making too. The point today, we didn't reduce any methane emissions today, and if our objective is moving in that direction, what we have done is set up the network to do that. And so there are policymakers listening who heard some solutions. There are companies listening who maybe heard some contacts provide some ideas on how they can access some of that funding. That's the key. So it's hard to close the conversation today because there's so much more to do. There's so much more to talk about. We have to close it, but as you said, everything will be posted. The contact information is there through GMI as well. So reach out to me or GMI if you're anxious to talk to somebody. This isn't the end of our process either. We've got another session coming up next month, so stay tuned and watch for more activity through GMI. Thanks everybody for presenting and for following today.
Thank you.